History, as they say, is written by the victors. But what happens when the victors aren't just the ones who win the war, but the ones who control the narrative? What happens when the stories of true heroes are buried, intentionally, under layers of misinformation and convenient amnesia? Today we're digging them up. We're talking about men who saw a continent not as a collection of borders drawn by outsiders, but as a unified, thriving home. They spoke of unity. They dreamed of freedom. And they paid the ultimate price. These weren't just men, they were movements. They were the personification of hope for millions, leaders who dared to imagine an Africa for Africans, free from the puppeteers pulling strings from thousands of miles away. They challenged the status quo, rejected the crumbs offered by their former masters, and demanded the entire loaf of bread for their people. Their voices were silenced, but their visions still echo through generations. Their ideas were so powerful, so dangerous to the established order, that the only way to stop them was to stop their hearts. Why don't we see these faces in our textbooks? Why are their names whispered instead of celebrated? It's because their stories are inconvenient truths. They expose a legacy of interference and exploitation that many would prefer we forget. But forgetting is a luxury we can't afford. The future of a continent depends on understanding its past. The real past, not the sanitized version. This is the Africa you're not shown, but I'm here to show you. Let's start in the heart of Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo. The year is 1960. Independence has finally arrived after decades of brutal Belgian rule. And at the podium, a man with fire in his eyes and electrifying charisma steps up. His name is Patrice Lumumba, Congo's first democratically elected prime minister. Where Belgian King Baudouin gave a speech praising the civilizing work of his predecessor, Lumumba refused to play along. He stood before the world and spoke the raw, unfiltered truth about the humiliation, the exploitation, and the suffering his people had endured under colonial rule. It was a stunning moment of defiance. Lumumba's vision was simple yet revolutionary, a truly independent Congo. He didn't just want the Belgians to leave, he wanted their influence, their economic control, their puppet strings gone. He envisioned a nation where the immense mineral wealth of the land would benefit the Congolese people, not foreign corporations. He preached national unity in a country deliberately fractured along ethnic lines by its colonizers. This wasn't just post-colonial rhetoric. It was a direct threat to the Western powers and multinational companies who had grown rich off Congo's resources and had no intention of letting that go. They expected a puppet, they got a patriot. His refusal to bow down made him a marked man. When a secessionist movement, conveniently backed by Belgian interests, erupted in the mineral-rich Katanga province, Lumumba sought help. He turned to the UN, who did little, and then, in a move that sealed his fate in the Cold War era, he asked the Soviet Union for assistance. The West, particularly the CIA and Belgian intelligence, saw red. Within months, he was deposed in a coup, captured, and handed over to his enemies. He was tortured and executed, his body dissolved in acid. They didn't just kill a man, they tried to erase the very idea of a sovereign Congo. Now let's travel west to a small, landlocked nation that, for a brief, shining moment, became a beacon of hope for the entire continent. We're going to Burkina Faso, which in 1983 was called Upper Volta, one of the poorest countries on the planet. And then a 33-year-old army captain named Thomas Sankara came to power. He wasn't your typical leader. He rode a motorcycle to work, lived in a small house, and sold off the government's fleet of Mercedes cars. He renamed the country Burkina Faso, meaning Land of the Upright People, and he dedicated his life to making that name a reality. He was, in every sense, Africa's chief. Sankara's dream was radical self-reliance. He rejected the crippling cycle of foreign aid and debt, famously declaring, "He who feeds you, controls you." Instead of begging the IMF and World Bank for loans, he mobilized his own people. In just 4 years, his government vaccinated 2.5 million children against measles and meningitis, a feat praised by the WHO. He launched literacy campaigns that skyrocketed the rate from 13% to 73%. He built roads and railways with local labor, planted 10 million trees to fight desertification, and championed women's rights in a way that was unheard of, banning forced marriage and appointing women to high government positions. His anti-imperialist stance was as fierce as his domestic policies. He publicly condemned the neo-colonial debt that was strangling African nations, urging his fellow leaders to form a united front and refuse to pay. This, of course, did not sit well with powerful international financial institutions or with France, the former colonial power that still held immense sway in the region. His revolutionary fire inspired the poor but terrified the elite, both at home and abroad. In 1987, his revolution was cut short. He was assassinated in a coup led by his close friend and second-in-command, Blaise Compaoré, a man who many believe had foreign backing. The upright man was cut down, and his country was immediately reopened to IMF loans. Some leaders command armies with guns, others command them with ideas. Amilcar Cabral was a master of both. He was an agronomist, a poet, a diplomat, and a revolutionary theorist who became the intellectual heart of the liberation movement in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. More than just a guerrilla fighter, Cabral understood that true liberation wasn't just about kicking out the Portuguese colonizers. It was about decolonizing the mind. He famously said, "Claim no easy victories," understanding that the struggle was long and required more than just military force. It required a cultural and psychological revolution. Cabral's approach was methodical and profound. He didn't just lead the PAIGC, the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. He educated it. He established schools and health clinics in the liberated zones, creating a new society even as the war for independence raged on. He argued that the liberation movement must be rooted in the culture of the people, not in foreign ideologies. His Pan-African vision saw the struggle in Guinea-Bissau as part of a larger, continent-wide fight against imperialism. He was a thinker of global stature, respected from Havana to Stockholm, a man who could articulate the aspirations of the oppressed on the world stage. His success was his undoing. By 1973, the PAIGC controlled most of the country, and Portuguese defeat was imminent. Cabral was on the verge of declaring unilateral independence, a move that would have sent shockwaves through the remaining colonial empires. But just months before he could see his dream realized, he was assassinated in Conakry, the capital of neighboring Guinea. The trigger was pulled by a disgruntled member of his own party, but the plot had all the hallmarks of a foreign intelligence operation. Portugal's secret police, the PIDE, had long sought to eliminate him. They couldn't defeat his ideas on the battlefield, so they silenced the man who conceived them, hoping to halt the unstoppable tide of decolonization. Some fights for freedom don't end on Independence Day. In Cameroon, the French flag came down in 1960, but for many, the struggle was far from over. A pro-French government was installed while the true nationalist movement, the UPC, the Union of the Peoples of Cameroon, was brutally suppressed. The leader of this resistance, a medical doctor named Felix Roland Mumi, was forced into exile. But distance did not silence him. From Conakry, from Cairo, from Accra, he continued to be the most powerful voice against the neo-colonial regime that had hijacked his country's independence. Mumi was relentless. He was a diplomat for the voiceless, traveling the world, addressing the United Nations, and exposing the brutal reality of the French-backed government in Cameroon. He detailed the massacres, the concentration camps, and the ongoing French military presence that propped up the puppet regime. He was a constant, painful thorn in the side of France, which was desperately trying to present a clean, benevolent image of its post-colonial relationships in Africa. Mumi's testimony was a direct threat to this narrative, revealing the bloody truth behind the facade of a peaceful transition of power. The French intelligence agency, the SDC, decided this thorn needed to be removed permanently. In October 1960, while in Geneva for meetings, Mumi was approached by an agent posing as a journalist. He was invited to dinner and his drink was laced with thallium, a slow-acting, untraceable poison. He fell ill and died an agonizing death in a Swiss hospital weeks later. The doctor who fought for the health of his nation was killed by a poison slipped into his glass, an act of assassination designed to look like a natural illness. It was a clear message. Even in exile on neutral ground, the enemies of the colonial order were never safe. Imagine dedicating your life to one single, all-consuming goal, the freedom of your people. You build a movement from scratch. You travel the world to gather support. You lead a decade-long armed struggle, and you bring your nation to the very brink of independence. This was the life of Eduardo Mondlane, the founding father of Mozambican liberation. An educated, charismatic sociologist who had taught at Syracuse University. Mondlane chose to leave a comfortable life in America to return home and lead the fight against Portuguese colonial rule, one of the most stubborn and brutal in Africa. In 1962, he united disparate nationalist groups to form Frelimo, the Mozambique Liberation Front. Under his leadership, Frelimo wasn't just a military force, it was a government in waiting. Like Cabral, Mondlane established schools and health services in the areas they liberated, laying the groundwork for a new independent Mozambique. He was a brilliant diplomat, securing support from both Eastern and Western Bloc nations. as well as from international organizations. He skillfully navigated the complex geopolitics of the Cold War, always keeping his eye on the prize, a free and unified Mozambique. By 1969, Frelimo controlled a significant portion of the country, and the Portuguese were losing the war. Mondlane was the undisputed leader, the man who would surely become the first president of a free Mozambique. But the forces determined to stop him had other plans. In February of that year, at his office in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, he opened a package. It was a book, but hollowed out and fitted with a bomb. The explosion killed him instantly. The assassination was widely attributed to Agenter Press, a pseudo-press agency that was actually a front for Portuguese intelligence and their network of right-wing mercenaries. They couldn't defeat him in battle, so they sent his death through the mail. Our final story takes us to the dawn of a new era in a country whose struggle captivated the world, South Africa. The year is 1993. Apartheid is on its deathbed. Nelson Mandela has been released, and the country is stumbling towards its first democratic election. In this fragile, tense moment, one man stood out as a voice of radical truth and a hero to the masses. His name was Chris Hani. As the former leader of the ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, and the head of the South African Communist Party, he had impeccable struggle credentials. But it was his charisma and his unwavering connection to the poor that made him a phenomenon. While some leaders were negotiating in boardrooms, Hani was in the townships, speaking the language of the people. He was handsome, passionate, and fiercely intelligent. He consistently polled as the second most popular leader in the country, right behind Mandela himself. For millions of impoverished black South Africans, Hani was the guarantee that freedom would mean more than just the right to vote. He was the promise of economic justice, of land redistribution, of a genuine transformation of a society built on racial inequality. He was seen by many as Mandela's natural successor, the man who would carry the revolution into its next, more difficult phase. This popularity made him a huge threat, not just to the white right wing who feared him, but also potentially to factions within the new political establishment. On Easter weekend in 1993, just a year before the elections, Chris Hani was gunned down in the driveway of his home by a white supremacist. The assassination pushed South Africa to the absolute brink of civil war. While the killer was caught, many South Africans to this day believe the plot was wider, that political forces who feared Hani's uncompromising vision and immense popularity wanted him out of the picture. His death was an act of political fear, an attempt to kill the dream of a truly radical, economically just post-apartheid South Africa before it could even begin. So, Lumumba, Sankara, Cabral, Mumi, Mondlane, Hani. 6 names, 6 stories, 1 tragic pattern. These weren't just politicians, they were possibilities. They represented a road not taken, an Africa that could have been, an Africa that is self-reliant, unified, and truly unapologetically free. And you have to ask yourself, why is this pattern so consistent? Is it just a coincidence that every time a powerful, charismatic, anti-imperialist leader emerges on the continent, they meet a violent, premature end? It starts to look less like a series of unfortunate events and more like a strategy. The forces that benefited from a dependent, fractured Africa didn't just disappear when the colonial flags came down, they adapted. They learned to pull strings from the shadows, to use debt as a leash, and to eliminate any leader who dared to cut those strings. The greatest weapon they have isn't guns or bombs, it's our ignorance. It's the hope that we won't connect the dots, that we won't learn these names, that we'll accept the sanitized, incomplete version of history they hand us. Because if we knew, if we truly understood the price that was paid, we would start asking some very uncomfortable questions. But their story doesn't end with their deaths. Because an idea, a true vision, can't be assassinated. It can't be poisoned or dissolved in acid. It lives on in the people who remember, who learn, and who carry the torch forward. Knowing these stories isn't about dwelling on the past. It's about arming ourselves for the future. It's about understanding the challenges that still exist and recognizing the courage it takes to confront them. Their fight is now our lesson. And it's our duty to make sure that this time the story has a different ending. Thank you for watching.